The crimson sun of Kepler, 442b burned overhead like a malevolent eye, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. Commander Zara felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders heavier than the gravity on this forsaken planet. 23 cadets from 7 different species stood before her, their eyes reflecting a mixture of excitement and terror. Listen up, you sorry excuse for future officers. Zara's voice cracked like a whip across the barren plateau. This is your final survival examination. You have exactly 72 hours to construct a shelter using only organic materials found on this planet. No tools, no synthetic materials, nothing but your hands and whatever passes for brains in those thick skulls of yours. The Vorthack cadet, Kex, flexed his 4 muscular arms with obvious confidence. His reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Commander, my species has been building shelters for millennia. This will be simple. Oh, will it now? Zara's laugh was cold as space itself. That's funny, because last time I checked, your people lived in metal cities floating in gas clouds. When was the last time you touched actual dirt scale skin? Kex's confident expression wavered slightly, his golden eyes narrowing. The other cadets shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension building like static before a storm. The ethereal twins, Mira and Lena, floated slightly above the ground, their translucent forms shimmering in the alien sunlight. They whispered each other in harmonious tones that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. We commune with nature, Mira said, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality. The organic matter will bend to our will. Right. Zara rolled her eyes so hard they nearly fell out her skull. Because talking to plants worked so well for your species when the Silicon Wars broke out. Oh, wait. That's right. You spent 3 centuries hiding in energy cocoons while everyone else fought for survival. The twins' luminous forms flickered with indignation, but they said nothing more. Standing apart from the group, arms crossed and looking thoroughly unimpressed, was the human cadet. Jake Murphy had been the subject of countless debates since his arrival at the Academy. Humans were still considered a primitive species by most galactic standards, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel a century ago. And you, Murphy, Zara's voice dripped with disdain. I suppose you think your species has some magical connection to building things? Jake shrugged, his brown eyes scanning the surrounding landscape with calculated interest. Well, Commander, my great-grandfather built a log cabin with nothing but an axe and sheer stubbornness. Of course, that was back when humans had to actually work for a living instead of asking computers to do everything for them. A few cadets snickered, but Zara's expression remained stone-cold serious. Confidence is good, Murphy. Overconfidence gets you killed. She activated her risk communicator, sending their positions to the monitoring station. Remember, cadets, this isn't just about building a shelter. It's about survival. The temperature drops to minus 40 degrees at night, and there are creatures on this planet that would love nothing more than to make you their next meal. The crystalline cadet Thorn stepped forward on his 6 spindly legs. His body resembled a walking cluster of purple crystals, each facet reflecting the light in dazzling patterns. Commander, our species requires very specific resonance frequencies to maintain structural integrity. If we cannot achieve harmonic alignment with the organic materials, then you'll shatter like cheap glass and become very expensive alien gravel. Zara finished with a cruel smile. Life's tough, Sparkles. Deal with it. The guttural delegation, led by the massive Brugg, grunted their approval. Standing nearly 8 feet tall and covered in thick, moss-like fur, they looked like walking trees themselves. Brugg's voice rumbled like distant thunder when he spoke. Organic matter is home. We build good shelter. Strong shelter. At least someone here has the right idea, Zara muttered. The rest of you better start learning fast. As the cadets dispersed across the plateau, each looking for suitable materials, Jake found himself oddly calm. While the others frantically gathered armloads of branches, leaves, and strange alien fungi, he sat cross-legged on a small rise, simply observing. The Vorthack had immediately begun constructing an elaborate framework using thick branches, their 4 arms allowing them to work with impressive speed and precision. But Jake noticed they were fighting the natural curve of the wood, forcing it into geometric patterns that stressed the material. The ethereal twins were attempting to communicate with a grove of feathery, blue-tinted trees, their voices rising and falling in complex harmonies. The trees, unsurprisingly, remained completely unresponsive. Thorn was trying to arrange various organic materials into crystal-like geometric patterns, but every structure he built immediately collapsed under its own weight. "Having fun over there, Murphy?" Kex called out, sweat beading on his scaled forehead as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn branch. "Or are you waiting for the materials to build themselves?" Jake grinned, finally rising to his feet. "Oh, I'm learning plenty, lizard boy. Like how not to build a shelter. You arrogant little primate." Kex snarled, his forearms flexing menacingly. "My people were building cities when yours were still throwing feces at each other. Yeah, well, my people were building shelters when yours were still swimming in primordial soup." Jake shot back, his voice carrying just enough edge to make several cadets stop and stare. "Difference is, we never forgot how to do it. The first night felt like a curtain of ice. The temperature plummeted with shocking suddenness, and the alien landscape transformed into a frozen hellscape. Strange howls echoed across the plateau, and glowing eyes appeared in the darkness beyond their camp. Most of the cadets huddled together near the emergency beacon, their hastily constructed shelters having failed spectacularly. Kex's geometric framework had collapsed when it was contracted in the cold. The ethereal twins were barely visible, their forms flickering weakly as they tried to maintain cohesion in the frigid air. Only Brugg and his fellow gutturals seemed comfortable, their thick fur and natural affinity for organic matter allowing them to construct crude but effective lean-tos. And Jake, while the others shivered and complained, Jake sat calmly beside a small fire, seemingly unbothered by the harsh conditions. He had spent the entire day gathering materials, but unlike the others, he had chosen his selections with careful deliberation. "How is that human not freezing to death?" Mira whispered, her translucent form barely visible in the firelight. "Humans are surprisingly adaptable," Thorn observed, his crystalline structure chiming softly in the wind. "Perhaps there is more to their primitive nature than we assumed." Jake overheard the conversation and chuckled. "Primitive, huh? Tell me, Crystal Boy, how many of your people could survive on a planet like this without technology?" "That is not the point," Thorn replied stiffly. "We have evolved beyond the need for such crude survival skills. Right up until the moment you need them," Jake said, poking at his fire with a stick. "Then you're just expensive decoration." The second day brought new challenges. The alien sun seemed even more merciless than before, and several cadets were showing signs of heat exhaustion. The ethereal twins had become nearly transparent, their energy reserves depleting rapidly. Jake, meanwhile, had begun the serious work of construction. He had identified a natural depression in the ground that would provide protection from the wind, and he was methodically weaving together long, flexible branches into a framework that followed the natural contours of the landscape. "What are you doing differently?" Brugg asked, his massive form casting a shadow over Jake's work area. The guttural's voice carried genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Jake paused in his weaving, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm not fighting the materials. Big guy, I'm working with them. See how these branches want to bend? I'm not trying to force them straight. I'm using their natural curve to create strength." Brugg nodded slowly, his moss-covered features thoughtful. "Wise. We do similar with living trees. Bend, not break." "Exactly," Jake grinned. "Your people get it. Wood isn't metal. It's alive, even after it's cut. It has memory, grain, personality. You work with it, not against it." As the day progressed, Jake's shelter began to take shape. Unlike the rigid geometric structures the others had attempted, his design flowed like water, following the natural lines of materials. He wove branches together in complex patterns that distributed stress evenly, creating a structure that was both flexible and strong. The other cadets watched with growing amazement as Jake's shelter seemed to grow organically from the ground itself. He had mixed mud with fibrous plant matter to create a primitive but effective mortar, sealing gaps and reinforcing weak points. "This is impossible," Kex muttered, his own second attempt at construction lying in ruins around him. How is a primitive human outbuilding all of us? Maybe because he's not trying to recreate his homeworld. Lena observed, her voice barely audible. He's adapting to this one. The third and final day arrived with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of severe storm. Commander Zara arrived with the evaluation team just as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Time's up, cadets," she announced, her voice carrying over the growing wind. "Let's see what you've managed to accomplish." One by one, the structures were tested. Kex's third attempt, a more modest design, held together for several minutes before the wind found a weak point and unraveled it like a ball of yarn. The ethereal twins' energy constructs simply dissolved in the rain. Thorne's crystalline arrangement shattered the moment the first gust hit it. Only Brugg's simple lean-to and Jake's woven shelter remained standing. "Impressive work, Cadet Brugg," Zara acknowledged, examining the guttural's construction. "Simple, effective, functional. Your people's connection to organic matter serves you well." Brugg nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Commander. But human shelter is better, more clever, more artistic." All eyes turned to Jake's creation. What had started as a simple framework had evolved into something that seemed almost alive. The woven branches created a dome-like structure that flexed with the wind rather than resisting it. The mud and fiber mortar had dried to a stone-like hardness, yet maintained enough flexibility to move with the organic framework. Rain rolled off the shelter's surface like water off a duck's back, and the wind seemed to flow around it rather than through it. "Well, Murphy," Zara said, her voice carrying a grudging respect, "it seems your primitive ancestors knew a thing or two about survival after all." Jake emerged from his shelter, completely dry despite the downpour. "My great-grandfather used to say that the best shelter is one that becomes part of the landscape. Don't fight nature, work with it." "And the other species?" Zara asked, gesturing to the failed constructions around them. "What's your assessment of their techniques?" Jake's expression grew serious, the earlier sarcasm replaced by genuine analysis. "They're all thinking like engineers instead of survivors. They're trying to impose their will on the materials instead of listening to what the materials want to do." Kex was building a fortress when he needed a nest. The twins were trying to command instead of cooperate. Thorne was building a crystal palace when he needed a mud hut. The storm intensified, and the evaluation team hurried to the shelter of their transport. As they prepared to leave, Zara turned back to Jake. "You've proven your point, Murphy. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we test your combat skills." Jake grinned, rain dripping from his hair. "Looking forward to it, Commander. But just remember, humans didn't become the dominant species on our planet by being nice." As the transport lifted off, Jake remained behind with the other cadets, all of whom were now staring at him with a mixture of respect and apprehension. The cocky human who had seemed so out of place among galactic elite had just demonstrated that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The storm raged on, but Jake's shelter stood firm, a testament to the power of working with nature rather than against it. Inside, warm and dry, he settled down for the night, already planning his next move in a complex game of interspecies politics that was the Academy. Outside, the alien world howled its fury, but Jake Murphy slept peacefully, dreaming of log cabins and the stubborn old man who had taught him that sometimes the simple solutions were the most elegant ones. The reckoning. The morning after the storm brought an eerie calm to the plateau. Jake emerged from his shelter to find the landscape transformed. What had been a barren expanse of rock and scattered vegetation was now a muddy wasteland littered with debris from the failed constructions of his fellow cadets. Well, came a familiar voice dripping with venom. The monkey emerges from his mud hut. Jake turned to see Kex approaching, his golden eyes blazing with humiliation and rage. The Vortex-scaled hide was caked with mud, and his forearms were scratched and bruised from his repeated failures. "Morning, sunshine," Jake replied cheerfully, stretching in the pale alien sunlight. "Sleep well?" "Oh, wait. That's right. You spent the night huddled around the emergency beacon like a lost hatchling." Kex's muscles tensed, and Jake could see the barely contained violence in his posture. "You think you're so clever, don't you, human? One lucky success, and you act like you've conquered the universe." Lucky? Jake laughed, but there was an edge to it now. You want to know what luck is? Scale boy? Luck is that I'm feeling generous this morning. Otherwise, I might point out that your people's great engineering achievements are built on the backs of slave labor and stolen technology. The accusation hit home like a physical blow. Several cadets gasped, and Kex's face went deadly pale beneath the scales. It was a well-known fact throughout the galaxy that the Vorthak Empire had been built on conquest and exploitation, but it was rarely mentioned in polite company. You dare, Kex began, his voice a low growl. I dare a lot of things, Jake interrupted, his own voice growing cold. But mostly, I dare to succeed where you failed. Repeatedly. Commander Zara materialized as if from thin air, her expression thunderous. What's going on here, cadets? Just a friendly morning chat, Commander, Jake said, his tone innocent but his eyes never leaving Kex's face. Discussing the finer points of architectural philosophy. Is that what we're calling it? Zara's voice could have frozen helium. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a pair of testosterone-poisoned idiots about to start a fight. No fight here. Commander, Kex said, but his 4 hands were clenched into fists. Just clarifying some misconceptions about superior species. Superior? Jake's eyebrows shot up. That's rich. Coming from someone who couldn't build a decent shelter if his life depended on it. Oh, wait, it did depend on it, and you still failed. Enough! Zara's roar echoed across the plateau, causing several of the smaller cadets to flinch. Since you two seem so eager to prove your superiority, let's put it to the test. Combat evaluation starts now. The other cadets formed a rough circle around the designated combat area, their earlier exhaustion forgotten in the face of this unexpected entertainment. Jake could see the mixture of anticipation and fear in their eyes. Most of them had never seen a human fight, and the legends about human combat prowess were wildly contradictory. Standard Academy rules, Zara announced, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command. No weapons, no killing. Fight continues until one opponent yields or is incapacitated. Cadet Murphy, you're up first. Jake stepped into the circle, rolling his shoulders to loosen up. Who's my dance partner, Commander? Me, growled Brugg, stepping forward with surprising grace for such a massive creature. Want to test human strength against guttural power. Jake nodded respectfully. Despite their earlier conversation, he knew better than to underestimate the 8-foot-tall walking tree. Fair enough, big guy. Try not to turn me into fertilizer. Brugg's laugh rumbled like distant thunder. We'll try, but guttural strength is legendary. The two opponents faced each other across the makeshift arena. Brugg's massive frame made Jake look like a child by comparison, but there was something in the human stance that suggested he wasn't intimidated. Begin! Zara shouted. Brugg charged forward with surprising speed, his massive arms reaching out to grab Jake in a crushing bear hug. It was a straightforward attack, relying on overwhelming force and superior size. Jake had other ideas. Instead of dodging backward, Jake stepped forward and to the side, using Brugg's own momentum against him. He grabbed the guttural's extended arm and pivoted, throwing his entire body weight into a hip toss that sent the massive alien tumbling to the ground with an earth-shaking thud. What the Brugg started to say, but Jake was already moving. The human rolled backward, coming up in a defensive crouch just as Brugg regained his footing. The guttural's expression had changed from confidence to wariness. Humans are sneaky, Brugg observed, circling more carefully now. Use cleverness instead of strength. We use whatever works, Jake replied, matching the alien's movement. Strength is nice, but leverage is better. Brugg feinted left, then lunged right, trying to catch Jake off guard. But the human was ready, dropping low and sweeping the guttural's legs out from under him. As Brugg fell, Jake sprang up and landed a solid punch to the alien's solar plexus. The blow would have felled a human, but Brugg's alien physiology absorbed the impact with minimal effect. His massive hand shot out, catching Jake by the ankle and dragging him down. Now it was Jake's turn to hit the ground hard. Brugg's grip was like being caught in a steel cable, and Jake could feel the bones in his ankle creaking under the pressure. Got you now, human, Brugg said, trying to maintain his hold while positioning himself for a finishing blow. Jake's response was to drive his free heel directly into Brugg's elbow joint. The guttural's grip loosened just enough for Jake to twist free, rolling away and coming up with a slight limp. Clever, but not clever enough, Brugg growled, advancing more cautiously now. The two combatants circled each other warily. Jake's advantage in speed and technique was being neutralized by Brugg's superior reach and durability. Every time Jake landed a blow, the guttural absorbed it and kept coming. "Come on, human," Kex called out mockingly. "Show us that legendary human ferocity we keep hearing about." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't take his eyes off Brugg. "You want ferocity, scale boy? Let me show you what happens when you back a human into a corner." The change in Jake's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. His stance shifted, becoming more aggressive, more predatory. When Brugg lunged forward again, Jake didn't dodge or deflect. Instead, he met the attack head-on, grabbing the guttural's massive arms and using them as leverage to drive his knee upward into Brugg's midsection. The impact folded the alien in half, and Jake immediately followed up with a series of rapid strikes to pressure points he had identified during their earlier grappling. Brugg's nervous system, despite its alien nature, responded to the targeted attacks, and the massive creature stumbled backward, his coordination disrupted. "Yield," Jake said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. "You fought well, but this is over." Brugg looked around the circle, seeing the expressions of shock and awe on the faces of the other cadets. Slowly, he nodded. "Human wins. Fight with honor and cleverness." "You too, big guy," Jake replied, extending his hand to help Brugg to his feet. "That's the hardest fight I've had in years." The respect between the two combatants was obvious, and it seemed to diffuse some of the tension in the circle. But Kex was having none of it. Lucky victory against a slow opponent. The Vortex sneered. "Let's see how the human does against superior speed and reflexes." Jake turned to face his tormentor, and this time there was no warmth in his expression. "You sure about this, Kex? Because once we start, I'm not going to hold back." "Neither am I, monkey," Kex replied, his forearms flexing in anticipation. "Time to put you in your place." "Begin!" Zara shouted again. Kex's attack was like lightning, his forearms moving in a complex pattern designed to overwhelm any defense. But Jake had been watching the Vortex movements since their first day, and he had identified the weakness in the alien's technique. While Kex's multiple arms gave him obvious advantages, they also created blind spots and timing issues. Jake slipped inside the Vortex guard, staying too close for the longer arms to be effective. "What are you doing?" Kex snarled, trying to back away to regain his reach advantage. "Teaching you a lesson," Jake replied, staying close and landing a series of quick jabs to Kex's ribs. "Rule number 1, never let your ego write checks your body can't cash." Kex's response was to grab Jake with two arms while striking with the other two. It was a devastating combination that should have ended the fight immediately. Should have. Jake twisted in the Vortex grip, using his flexibility to avoid the worst of the strikes while landing his own blows to nerve clusters and pressure points. Kex's superior strength began to work against him as Jake turned the alien's own power into a weapon. "Impossible!" Kex gasped, his grip weakening as Jake's precise strikes disrupted his nervous system. "How are you doing this?" "Humans have been fighting for survival for millions of years," Jake replied, his voice deadly calm. "We've learned to turn every advantage into a disadvantage, every strength into a weakness. You're strong, Kex, but you're also predictable." The Vortex coordination began to fail as Jake's surgical strikes accumulated their effects. His forearms, so coordinated moments before, began to work at cross purposes. His balance wavered, and his breathing became labored. "Yield," Jake said, applying pressure to a nerve cluster that sent waves of pain through Kex's body. "Or I'll show you what human creativity can really accomplish." For a moment, it looked like Kex might refuse. Pride warred with pain in his golden eyes, and Jake could see the exact moment when survival instincts overrode ego. "I yield," Kex whispered, his voice barely audible. Jake immediately released his holds and stepped back, offering a hand to help the fallen alien to his feet. "Good fight, Kex. You've got the tools. You just need to learn how to use them better." The Vorthack looked at the offered hand with confusion, then slowly reached out and accepted the help. "Why?" he asked. "Why help me after?" "Because holding grudges is a waste of energy," Jake replied. "And because we're all on the same team here, whether we like it or not." Commander Zara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Impressive performance, Murphy. But don't let it go to your head. This was just basic combat evaluation." "Understood, Commander," Jake replied, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he was already looking forward to the next challenge. As the cadets began to disperse, Jake noticed that the dynamics of the group had changed. Where before there had been condescension and dismissal, now there was respect and, in some cases, wariness. The human was no longer the primitive outsider to be pitied or mocked. "Hey, Murphy," Thorne called out, his crystalline structure chiming softly. "That technique you use against Kex, with the nerve clusters, could you teach me?" "Sure," Jake replied with a grin. "But first, let me show you how to build a shelter that won't collapse the moment someone sneezes on it." The laughter that followed was genuine, and Jake realized that something fundamental had changed. The test hadn't just been about survival skills or combat prowess. It had been about proving that humans belonged among the galactic community, not as junior partners or primitive curiosities, but as equals. As the alien sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Jake looked around at his fellow cadets and felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving at the academy. Belonging. The shelter he had built still stood, weathered but intact, a testament to the power of working with nature rather than against it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or firepower, but adaptability and the refusal to give up. And Jake Murphy, descendant of stubborn old men who built log cabins with nothing but axes and determination, was ready for whatever the universe might throw at him next. The stars began to appear in the alien sky, and Jake smiled. His great-grandfather would have been proud.